Okay, I'm going to talk about divide and conquer strategies. Now, this is a topic I touch on in a lot of my videos, but I'm going to address it specifically here and break it down to help you better understand what's going on and perhaps show you how you may be contributing to those divide and conquer strategies. The truth is that if you cannot explain divide and conquer strategies intricately, if you cannot explain them to somebody else, then you are very likely a victim of a divide and conquer strategy. You are very likely falling for these strategies. So, to start, the U.S. is a republic. A republic is a type of democracy. Okay, a lot of people like to conflate those two things, but the truth is a republic is a type of democracy. So, in a republic, we vote for people to represent our interests. Okay, and we hope that those people represent our interests, right? In theory, they should, okay? But if you ask around, on the left and the right, people will agree that our our representatives are not representing our interests, okay? They're not representatives, period, right? Even though they are masquerading as representatives. Why is this, okay? Why are our politicians not representing our interests? Well, again, it's the divide and conquer strategies, okay? That's the source of all of our problems, okay? And again, we're gonna break this down. So, how does it? What is the basis of a divide and conquer strategy? Well, you vote for who you believe is going to represent your interests. You vote for the person you perceive is going to represent interests, right? So, if people can control your perception, okay, people can control what you believe, then they can control who you vote for. If the people who are controlling your perception have bad motives, okay, if they want to control you rather than to represent you, then they are going to manipulate they're going to manipulate your perception in such a way that benefits them, okay? And what ends up happening is that they end up not representing your interests, okay? This is exactly what's happening, okay? So, how does this happen? Well, the ruling class, okay, the people who control your perception, they control it through media. They control it through the mainstream media. Independent media, you may watch independent media and you may be a smart person and you may never watch mainstream media. But the fact is, the mainstream media has the title mainstream because they are the mainstream media. They are the predominant media. So they predominantly control public perception. So when you give a ruling class who has alternative motives other than actually representing interests, and you give them the power to control public perception, what happens is they divide the public amongst themselves and they manufacture fake divides to distract you from the real divide. What is the real divide? The real divide is the class divide, okay? And the only people that can control your perception effectively in the mainstream media are wealthy people, right? The ruling class, the 1%. They purchase the mainstream media and tell you what to think, okay? They control your perception. So they do so by distracting you from this class divide. And in effect, they will come up with any divide under the sun, anything they can think of, to divide you amongst yourselves, to divide the middle and lower class amongst themselves. So what do these divides look like? Well, there's the abortion divide, right? Pro-choice versus pro-life. There's even a young old versus old divide, okay? Like almost like a tradition versus a progressivism divide. There's a men versus woman divide, right? There's obviously the race divide. That one's been here forever, like Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter. There's the LGBTQ divide versus the LGBTQ divide. There's the vax versus anti-vax divide. There's religion versus religion, or religion versus atheism even. Okay, all of these divides, when they take up your perception, when you put energy into thinking about them, that energy is no longer being used to perceive the class divide. That's what they want to do. They want to distract you from the real source of your problems. So we'll go back through these divides that they use. Okay, so to start, abortion, pro-choice versus pro-life, right? If everyone had the money to support a child, do you think there would be so many abortions? The answer is obviously no. Okay, so again, the class divide causes these abortions to rise, and then the media, they create a divide between you, and they increasingly fill your perception with this abortion, with this pro-choice versus pro-life divide, and then you forget about the class divide that caused it, right? You forget about the class divide that keeps people from being able to support children. Okay, people can barely support themselves. 60% of people are living paycheck to paycheck, paycheck to paycheck. How the hell are you gonna have a child? Okay, so what else? You have this men versus women divide, right? Young men and women in particular they're not dating each other like we have traditionally seen. Okay, there's a loneliness epidemic, right? And the reason for this is because, again, the wealth inequality is insane. As I said, 60% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. So when a woman looks for a man who can support a child, and the number of people who can support a child the number of men who can support a child are increasingly are decreasing, then those women have to go to the top 10% of men, right? And maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but the fact is as the wealth inequality increases, that exaggeration disappears, right? It becomes more of a reality. So again, the media covers this men versus women divide. They cover this loneliness epidemic, and they won't tell you that the class divide is the problem. They won't tell you that the wealth inequality is the problem. They'll point at anything else. They'll point at social media. They'll point at, cultural issues. They'll point at anything to blame for this divide between young men and women. Okay, if a population is not replacing itself, it's because there's a resource allocation problem. So if young men and women are not having children at a rate that can replace the population, there's a resource allocation problem. Okay, people want to have children. It's built into us. Okay, so what else? The race divide. Okay, Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, or just white versus black. Again, so when the European settlers, the people that settled in the United States, when they went down to Africa and brought these slaves over, they had the technology to they had better technology, they had better weapons than these African slaves, and that enabled them to control them, right? That enabled them to enslave them. If those settlers showed up in Africa, and it was the white people who had the primitive weapons, and it was the Africans who had the muskets or whatever, Africans would have won that. Okay, the Africans would have enslaved the black people, would have enslaved the white people. It would have gone completely differently. Now, instead, imagine that they show up and they are on an even footing. Imagine that they have the same weapons, and they have goods and services that they can offer each other. What would have happened in that case is they would have just traded with each other. They would have seen each other as mutually beneficial, okay? And they wouldn't have wasted time trying to kill each other or trying to enslave each other. They would have realized that it was a lost cause. Again, the class divide is what creates these problems, okay? And that class divide has lived on all the way from the slavery days to today, okay? The generational wealth has never caught up. Okay, there's still a wealth disparity between black and white people, and that drives the race divide. And then the media, again, mainstream media covers that race divide and divides you. It keeps you distracted on that race divide rather than the class divide that was the source of it. Okay, the theme here is that the class divide is the source of everything, and the mainstream media, okay, the ruling class will not tell you that. They will distract you. This is how they again, divide and conquer. So what else? LGBT versus anti-LGBT. I'm going to give you a little theory here, and you might not like it, but why is this LGBT community growing so fast? Okay, some people will have you believe that it's because social rights are, people are becoming more accepting of LGBT members, right? They're becoming more accepting of it. And that's enabling more people to feel comfortable to come out of the closet. I'm going to give you an alternative theory, okay? Lesbians and gay people and trans people, they're not very good at reproducing, are they? So, in the same way that we're getting abortions because we can't, in the same way that abortions are a form of birth control in a way because we can't support children, I'd like you to imagine that the growing LGBT community is literally a product of poor resource allocation. Okay, there are people, our genes are expressing themselves in such a way that it's effectively a natural form of birth control. Okay, our gene, like if you look into epigenetics, I mean, there may not be a gay gene, but we don't know everything yet. There may be a multitude of gay genes, we don't know. But I would like you to consider the possibility that a growing LGBT community is a product of poor resource allocation. Okay, if we can't support children, then our genes are going to express themselves in such a way that keeps us from having children. And what better way than to make us gay, lesbian, or trans? Okay, and again, that's a theory, but you got to think about these things outside of the box sometimes. Okay, and I'm not looking down on the LGBT community at all. Okay, and the truth is, there's actually some beauty to this because human beings need love. They need connection to human beings, right? And if it is harmful to get that love from the opposite sex due to the fact that you will ultimately end up having children that you can't support, then our genes are expressing themselves in a way that gets that love from the same sex, right? And it's kind of beautiful actually. It's incredible if you think about it in this way. It's pretty incredible what evolution can do. But how about vax versus anti-vax? Well, people will have you believe that these vaccines are, the people that created them, these healthcare industries are trying to, they're trying to improve public health, right? But we don't have universal health care, okay? If the government cared about public health, we would have universal health care. It's obviously not a priority, and a lot of people on the right, a lot of people that are anti-vax, they know that it's not a priority. They know that if a healthcare industry is trying to push a vaccine, a profit-driven health industry is trying to push a vaccine, they know that their motives are just profit, right? And this creates fear, right? It creates fear in the right. They're like, oh, this vaccine is probably not in our best interest because, again, the government paid however many billions of dollars to these healthcare industries for these vaccines, and yet they didn't they weren't tested well, right? They were rushed out. There's a distrust for the pharmaceutical industry, and it's a very understandable distrust. And if you don't believe that, I'm sorry, but you're not paying attention. Okay, they just want to profit on us. They want to profit on poor health. That's it. So this anti-vax versus vax debate that's shown in the media, again, half of the or most of the left-wing media platforms are sponsored by Pfizer. Of course they're going to tell you to get this vaccine. Of course they're going to tell you to get 7 boosters. They're sponsored by the company that makes them. Okay, if you deny these profit motives and accept that and pretend that they actually care about public health, when in reality, if they actually did, universal healthcare we would have universal healthcare in this country, then you're just fooling yourself. Okay, so again, how about religion versus atheism, or religion versus another religion even? They create these divides between, Muslims and Christians, or Christians and atheists. They say that atheists can't possibly have morals. Where would you get your morals? Well, it seems to me that you don't need to follow a religion to get morals. You just have to realize that treating your fellow human will lead them to treat you well in return, right? It seems kind of mutually beneficial. But again, the media divides us along these lines. There's a lot of religious narratives in mainstream media, particularly on the right? And the left doesn't really push these religious narratives, right? as strongly. And again, that creates a divide and it distracts you from the class war. So I went through the main divides the main distractions that the mainstream media creates. But what are some other kind of indirect distractions that the media will push in order to distract you, in order to basically in order to distract your perception away from the class divide? Well, sports. Okay, if you get so invested in a sport that your entire perception is focused on this sport that you're a fan of, then you're going to forget about the class divide. And who's profiting from that division? Who's profiting from your sports gambling? Again, the upper class, the companies that control the mainstream media. So how about what else? Diet. Even our diet is being divided. We are even being divided along diet lines for profit motives. And this isn't necessarily affect who you vote for, but it distracts you from the class divide, which is ultimately what should decide who you vote for. So diet, carnivore versus vegan, right? This is being pushed on YouTube everywhere. The YouTube algorithm loves to push this. I even fall for it. I click on the carnivore videos despite the fact all the evidence against the red meat. But what else? There's one more kind of indirect distraction that the ruling class uses, that I can think of off the top of my head, that the ruling class uses to divide us. Well, I would just call it demoralization in general, okay? And it's not even so much a distraction, but it's more that, I mean, there are 40% of people that don't vote, okay? 40% of the population are unlikely voters. And they've basically been demoralized. They've been fooled into thinking that their vote doesn't matter, because if you vote for one of these two parties, you're going to get the same result. And they're kind of right. All of these divides I've given to you in this video, the more the middle and lower class collectively fall into these divides, these manufactured divides, the more the economic policy of these establishment Democrats and Republicans merge. Okay? That's a very important pattern to recognize. So I'm going to repeat myself, okay? The more the middle and lower class collectively falls into these manufactured divides, into these divide and conquer strategies, the more the economic policy of the establishment Democrats and Republicans parties merge. What that means is that the ruling class owns you. It means they own your perception. They've divided you amongst yourselves so effectively that they'll just maybe change the tax rates marginally up and down every now and then in order to appease you, in order to make them think that they're on your side. If we look back at President Reagan in 1980, what he did with the tax rates, the economy has never recovered. It's continued to get worse since then. He greatly reduced the tax rates on rich people, and the effect of that was, he said that trickle-down economics would benefit the lower class. It never happened. We know it never happened. It never worked. The wealth inequality has gotten worse ever since, despite the fact that productivity's increased, especially with the improvement of technology, right? I'm not going to go too much into Reaganomics because that's a topic for an entire video, but bottom line is the ruling class took over in 1980 because they rigged these tax rates against the middle and lower class. And with that, radio and television became increasingly popular. And with that, mainstream media became increasingly popular. And what happens then is they took over our perceptions, okay? And they started creating these divides, okay? These racial, political, social divides. And they distracted us from the economic divide, from the class divide. And with the internet, their ability to divide us has increased that much more, okay? So we need to raise class consciousness. Bottom line, it's really simple. We need to quit being distracted. If your vote is dependent on any of those divides I listed earlier, rather than the class divide, you are falling for the divide and conquer strategies, and you are contributing to the division and to the wealth inequality. Again, as I said, as I went over, the wealth inequality is the cause of all these problems. Okay, we need to start labor unions. We need to start strikes. maybe a national strike. If we started a truly organized national strike tomorrow, this country would be an entirely different place a year from now. It would be an entirely different place. The morale would skyrocket, okay? And you know what? The people at the top, their lives wouldn't even change that much. The thing is like it would work for everybody. But again, we just need to raise class consciousness, okay? If we look at COVID, the biggest benefit the ruling class got out of COVID wasn't the vaccine. It wasn't the profits that they got from the vaccine, okay? That was just a bonus. They didn't need that money, and that money didn't change anything for them, okay? The biggest benefit the ruling class got out of the COVID pandemic was the expansion of this vax versus anti-vax divide, okay? It was the expansion of division, okay? It's not about public health. Again, it's about creating more distractions that take up your mental energy and distract you from the class divide. The biggest benefit they got out of it was more division that, again, distract you from that class divide. We need to raise class consciousness. Class consciousness can be viewed as a magnitude of socialism. And socialism can exist, and it does exist within every capitalistic economy. There's a lot of illusions about what capitalism and socialism are. I made a video about that a few days ago. If you might want to watch it. If you think that socialism and capitalism are opposed to each other, if you think that they are mutually exclusive, you should watch that video, because the truth is that capitalism is an economic model and socialism is a social model that determines the profits that capitalism creates. We can have markets, we can have companies competing with each other in capitalistic markets, but we can also have class consciousness that divides those profits evenly. The magnitude of class consciousness is the magnitude of socialism, and we can have high class consciousness in a capitalistic economy, and that capitalist economy is good because it creates competition between these markets, right, or within these markets. And then that drives the technological improvements up. That's a good thing. But what's happening now is the owners are all teaming up, and they're making you think that your fellow middle lower class are your enemy along these divides that they've manufactured. And the end result of that is rising wealth inequality. The owners are taking our value production. They're stealing it from us. And if we don't have class consciousness, we will never claim that value production. It's always a class war. You should be a one-issue voter, and that issue should be the economy. That's it. If we allocate resources effectively, appropriately, all our problems disappear. We have the technology to do it, and we have the technology to produce more value more efficiently than ever before. We just have to harness it. We just have to allocate resources effectively. That's all we have to do. And we'll be living in a utopia in 10 years' time if we do so. We can even fix the rest of the world. It wouldn't even be hard. So, again, raise class consciousness. Stop voting along these racial, political, social, and these manufactured divides. The only divide that matters is the class divide. Okay? Thanks for watching.